Hey guys, so Rich Dad Poor Dad is a load of hogwash. So I'm not even going to sugarcoat this for you guys at all. I'm just gonna let you know straight off the bat, this book is just a complete load of hogwash. I finished reading it about a week ago, and it is honestly just full of so many lies, so much bad advice. It is just a complete load of horse manure, guys.
The following episode you are about to experience was recorded live over YouTube and adapted for ultimate playback quality. Welcome to the world of Market Talk with Tom Dunkins, where we explore the in-depth topics of business, branding, marketing, investing, and much more. The Market Talk podcast is a production of TeamTMS. Episodes are available on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Basically today I'm just going to be going over all of these lies in this book. I'm going to be doing a full analysis of this, and I'm going to be doing a bit of background research about the author here, this Robert Kiyosaki, who by the looks of things is just not a very good person, to be honest. He just seems like a bit of a scumbag, really. But yeah, I don't know how this book became the #1 personal finance book of all time. It's really just not a good book. But basically, for those of you who have not read Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, which came out in 1997, it is basically a personal finance book that just goes over sort of just the fundamentals of becoming a successful business person and really just becoming rich, really. And there are a few key messages in this book. It's really quite a simple book, really. There is not too much involved in it. I mean, it's not the biggest book. There's only there's about 300 pages, but it is a very small sort of paperback sort of book here. But basically, the #1 key message in this book is really that the rich don't work for money. They make money work for them. So basically what that quote is explaining is that the poor and middle class people work for their money, aka by jobs and work and all that, while the rich build assets that generate passive income, aka with investments in businesses and real estate and that kind of thing. So instead of chasing higher salaries, Rich Dad, well, the supposed Rich Dad character, this Robert Kiyosaki, basically wants you to focus on creating income streams that don't rely on your time. So he wants you to invest in like stocks and bonds and real estate and all that kind of thing, where you don't actually have to be working for the money. You basically just make the money work for you, really. So that's really the #1 tip in this book. Obviously, there is a bit more to it. I'm not going to be reading like the entire book in this one episode, obviously, but there is not really too much to cover in here. It's pretty self-explanatory, really. I just want to mention, by the way, 40% of everything in this book is basically stuff I already knew, and obviously it doesn't go for everyone, but it's stuff I already kind of knew, that I just learnt over time from like just, basic business class and like high school and that kind of thing. So 40% is basically just stuff that I already knew. 20% was useful information. Don't get me wrong, there was a bit of useful information that I learnt from this book. So 20% useful information, and then the other 40% is just absolute horse manure, guys. Like, it's all just lies and just deceitful stuff, really. So, yeah, basically what I said before, the #1 thing is the rich don't work for money, they make money work for them. And then the second point raised in this book is that financial education is more important than a high salary. So basically, what old Robert here is trying to teach you is that schools teach people how to be employees, not really not teach you how to manage money, really. So schools have all these big like science, chemistry classes and algebra classes and, all this kind of stuff that you don't really use in day-to-day life, but they don't really teach you how to actually successfully make money and manage your funds and become a rich person, really. So he kind of does blame the education system in this book a bit for not teaching children how to become rich later on in their lives, really. And basically just explains that the number one thing you should be focusing on in your early life is you should be learning about taxes, investing, business, and debt to get financially ahead, basically. So that is the second point raised in this book. There were a few like minor little points in here, like invest in assets, not liabilities, because he goes on about how some people don't really know the difference between liabilities and assets, which I can sort of see. Like some people don't really. Some people invest in like a house, they buy a mortgage and all that. But they don't. What they don't really realize is that that mortgage is actually more of a liability than an asset, and it's quite a technical thing behind it. You kind of have to read the book behind it. But basically, he's saying that assets are things that put money in your pocket, aka stocks, rental properties, businesses, all that kind of thing. And liabilities are things that take money out of your pocket, such as cars, big houses, debt, and that kind of thing. So basically, it's a very important thing that you realize what the difference is between assets and liabilities. It's also a very big point in this book. There's also a few things like he goes on about minding your own business. So you don't just work for someone else, you build your own financial future, really. So he wants you to build your own sort of corporation where you've got these stocks you're investing in, you've got a portfolio, and you're investing in, real estate and all that. So he wants you to have your own business rather than just working 9 to 5 for someone else, for an already rich person, really. Which I can sort of see that is somewhat useful information. Some of the tips in this book really sort of just open your eyes up to a few things, really. I mean, for the people that work 9 to 5 jobs, all you're really doing is just making someone else richer, like the owners of the company. You're just making them richer. You're not really doing much for yourself at all. I mean, there will be some times where you get like somewhat of a pay rise and, promotions and whatnot, but it's really just a rat race, really. You just get stuck in this one company and you just work for them your whole life, and you don't really go anywhere in the company. You just sort of stick to a relatively low salary, and that's basically it. That's all there is to it, really. So there were definitely a few eye-openers in this book, but that is quite a useful point there. But basically, after that, he just goes on about the power of corporations and taxes, how you should all have your own corporation so that you're not legally liable and all that. He goes on about taxes. There were a few very questionable things that he said in this book about taxes. I was like, oh my God, can you even publish that in a book like this? He goes on about taxes and how you should always find the best deal for taxes you can find, so you don't have to pay little to no taxes, really. He wants you to pay, but I will be getting into that a bit later in this episode. But basically, the sixth point is you work to learn, not just for money. Seventh point is fear and doubt keep people poor. And the eighth point is taking action is the key to wealth. So I'm not going to be going over everything in depth, but there were definitely a few useful points that did somewhat teach me a few things. But for the most part, it was just like some of the things in this book were just borderline fraudulent, honestly. But yeah, like I said, we will be getting into that lately. But before we do, I kind of just want to go over the author of the book here. His name is Robert Kiyosaki. But if we just take a look at his Twitter page here, or his X page, I should say, as you can see, he has posted quite a lot of questionable tweets over the past couple weeks here, really. As you can see, he is quite the Trump supporter. One of the tweets here, he said, "Make America rich again. President Trump is keeping his promise. Today he is allowing American oil companies to drill, baby, drill. Trump removed communist Biden's blocks to drilling oil in Gulf of America and millions of new acres with oil." So blah, blah, blah. There's just so many strange tweets here. He says, how many shooters shot President F. Kennedy, or John F. Kennedy, I should say? How many shooters shot Robert F. Kennedy? How many shooters were shooting at Donald Trump? Just one, blah, blah, blah. I don't even want to read some of this. But the main tweet I want to show you guys is, where is it, guys? He was going on about some sort of stock market crash that's coming this February or something. I'm just trying to find it here. Oh, yes, here it is. So, in Rich Dad's Prophecy 2013, I warned that the buggiest, is that even spelt right? I think that's a typo there. Biggest stock market crash in history was coming. That crash will be in February 2025. Good news, because in a crash, everything goes on sale. Cars and houses on sale now. Better news, billions will leave the stock and bond markets and rush into Bitcoin. Bitcoin will boom, boom, boom. Get on board while you can. So as you can see, he is quite the fan of Bitcoin. But I definitely do get what he's saying. Like, when there's a stock market crash, everything essentially just goes on sale, really. Like, everything just becomes way cheaper, and it's really just the time to be buying stocks, because everything like halves in price, and then when it gets back up again, that's when you sell. So you want to be buying shares and bonds and real estate and whatnot when the economy is doing not so well, basically, is what he's saying here, which I kind of understand. But he's basically predicting in this tweet that February this year, so right now, this month, is going to be the biggest stock market crash in all of history. He's not just talking about like the past decade or anything. He's talking about like all of history right here. So, and so far it has not really come true yet, guys, because we are in like past the middle of February now and still nothing's really happened. So, he's definitely made quite a few questionable tweets over time, and he is a Trump supporter. But yeah, I think he actually did co-author a book with Donald Trump before, like quite a while ago now, obviously, like in the 80s or 90s or something. But yeah, he is actually quite good friends with Donald Trump, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah, I don't know. He just doesn't really seem like the kind of person you can trust, really, old Robert Kiyosaki. But yeah, I kind of just wanted to show you his Twitter page here, his X page. So there you go. But the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about is I'm not actually sure how this guy even became rich before he released this book, because obviously the main thing that made him rich was being the author of this book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I think this is actually the thing that mainly made him rich. He does go on about, in the book, he says he was like a lecturer for university for like finance and that kind of thing, and he did make a few, he did do a few side projects like with real estate and all that, but apart from that, I think the main thing that got him rich was just this one book here. And then once this book was released, he sort of made like a spin-off, like a business sort of thing. Like it's called richdad.com, and he's wrote a few other books using his company here, richdad.com, and he's basically like, he made like a board game or something called Cash Flow, and he's done a few other projects, but really the main reason he became rich is because of this book. So like, when you read this book, you're essentially just reading something from someone that honestly, like, is not a big CEO or anything like that. Like, he didn't really have that much experience with, owning a business and that kind of thing when he wrote this book. So, like, me personally, I would trust more like Bill Gates or something when I'm getting my financial advice. Like, who are you going to trust? Like, a CEO of a multi-trillion-dollar company, or some guy named Robert Kiyosaki that goes on about his rich dad or whatever, and he has, he's never owned like a big Fortune 500 company or anything like that. So, I don't know. It's just a very shady thing. I will be getting into a bit of that later on. Um, but basically, now I just want to go over this Reddit review I found, which is very relatable here. So let's just read this real quick. So here we are on Reddit. This is kind of like a mini review of this book, but the title is it just me, or is Rich Dad Poor Dad actually an awful personal finance book? Really don't know how it became a classic. So I kind of do have to agree with that. I don't know how it became the first personal finance book, to be honest. Picking up foreclosed houses to flip. Sure, I bet you can make money this way, but certainly not great advice for the regular person. So yeah, in the book he goes on about how you should pick up foreclosed houses to flip, which is a bit outdated really, because these days it's just really not that easy to find a foreclosed house to flip, because basically in the days that this book was written, it was quite easy to find like foreclosures sort of thing. And basically, for those of you who do not know what a foreclosure is, it's basically a property where the owner just couldn't pay their mortgage anymore. So the bank basically just takes the house back off them and then just sells it for like half the price or something. But these days, that's not really as common, because now even the banks are just trying to get as much money as possible. So foreclosures are definitely a very rare thing. So some of the tips in this book are definitely quite outdated as well, and borderline legal, I must mention there. Everyone should join a multi-level marketing company to learn how to sell. This one made me laugh. That is awful advice. Yes, just not the best advice at some points in this book. In the book, I just want to also say, he goes on about paying yourself first before you actually pay your taxes or your expenses or anything else, or your liabilities, which I don't even think, that is really not the best advice at all. Like, you should definitely pay your taxes before anything else, because in the book, Robert basically goes on about how much he hates taxes, and he is just not a fan of taxes at all. So he basically just says you should always pay yourself before you pay any of your expenses or taxes or anything like that when you're, for your returns on your investments and that kind of thing. But that's just really not good advice, because if you pay yourself first and then you buy all the stuff for yourself, but then you don't have enough money to cover your expenses and your taxes or anything, then you're basically stuffed. Like, what do you even do? Like, obviously you should be paying for your expenses and your taxes first. I mean, that's just basic, like, practical advice that everyone knows right there, like, that is really just not a good piece of advice right there. So I was very surprised to read that in the book, that you should pay yourself before you pay taxes or expenses or anything. So that was definitely a very shocking discovery there. But anyway, another thing he goes on about in the book is basically he goes on about this thing called the cone of learning. So for those of you video viewers, you can see an illustration of the cone of learning on the screen here. And he basically goes on about this, and what it is basically the cone of learning says that 10% of what you read is what you remember. So how much you remember, how much you learn, basically you get it from 10% of what you read and 90% of what you do. So basically he goes on about the importance of actually doing things and experiencing, like, bankruptcy and all that, basically, so that you can learn from your mistakes. So you should lose a lot of money and then learn from your mistakes. So you need to actually do things, physically do things to learn, and that's 90% of what you learn. But then he says only 10% of what you read you actually remember. So essentially, I'm reading this book, and he's essentially just saying only 10% of what you read from this is what you're actually going to learn and, become successful from, really. So it's just a really strange thing to put in a book. Like, why am I even reading this book if essentially I'm only going to be, like, learning 10% of this? Like, it's just a very strange thing to be putting in the book. And he goes on about the cone of learning. But I definitely can see what he's saying about this, but at the same time, I mean, why would you even put this in a book that I'm reading? Like, I just don't even want to be reading this after this. But aside from that, there is just a lot of just straight up dangerous advice in this book. Like, one of the points is, if you're gonna go broke, you go broke big. So essentially, he's saying, never invest in anything small. Never put any small amounts into any investments. Always go big, because if you're going to go broke, you might as well go big, which is just a very dangerous piece of advice right there. I don't know why he would say that, because the number one rule to investing, or any sort of gambling really, is you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. But he's essentially just saying, if you're going to go broke, you might as well lose everything, because when the moment that you invest any amount of money into anything, there's always some sort of chance that you might lose everything. So he's fine with that, apparently. So he's saying you should always go for a high risk investment and invest a lot, basically, because that's the only way you can learn. So a very dangerous piece of advice right there. He also convinces people that college is for losers, really. So a big part of this book, a really big part of this book, that he continuously mentions in this book, is that he sort of gives off the impression that educated people are losers. And don't get me wrong, he does go on about how some level of education is necessary, but for the most part, he just goes on about it. He's essentially got two dads in this book. One of them is most likely fictional, which I will explain a bit later. But his rich dad is the one that's uneducated, and his poor dad is the one that's highly educated, has a, like, big 9 to 5 job or whatever, and he's worked all his life and all that. But yeah, his educated dad is actually the poor dad in this book, whereas the one that dropped out of high school is actually the rich dad. So in the book, he basically just he explains that highly educated people are usually just not very financially intelligent people, and that they're losers, really, for not, like, learning how to make money properly. So there was a bit of a scumbaggy thing, really, because obviously, if you have the option to go to university or whatever, obviously you should, because that's just the way the world goes round, unfortunately. And I'm not saying you should stick to a 9 to 5 job in your profession all your life, like, you can eventually invest in assets and that kind of thing, but it's still a good idea. I mean, what would happen if nobody went to college or university or anything? Like, the world just wouldn't operate properly. So it's a very strange piece of advice there, that educated people are losers, really. And that's not a quote, but that's what he's saying throughout the book, really. And in this book, there is also quite a lot of just straight up law breaking advice. Like, he literally advocates committing a felony in this book. So he says, have rich friends for trading stock based on non-public inside information. That's what friends are for, he says, which is just complete and utter horse manure. He's basically just saying, have friends that know inside information about stocks so that you can invest in those stocks before everyone else, which is actually completely illegal. He's literally spreading illegal advice in this book. Like, you can't just get someone that knows, inside information about stocks to, give you advice about what stocks to invest in, because for those of you who don't know, that is literally illegal right there. So that is literally law-breaking advice, which is definitely not good for the number one personal finance book of all time. That's all I'll say there. He also recommends tax fraud by deducting vacations and health club dues. In the book, he goes on a lot about how you can avoid taxes as much as possible, and how people that don't or barely ever pay taxes are actually smarter people than the people that do pay taxes. He says so. Basically, he's saying, he goes on about Donald Trump and all that not paying taxes, and how all that really means is that they're smarter people than the people that do work 9 to 5 and pay all these taxes, really. So, he recommends all these ways of avoiding taxes, and he goes on about how you should purchase things using your corporation so that you can avoid as much tax as possible, which is obviously illegal, because you can't just avoid tax on goods by just declaring that you're a business. You just can't do that. So yeah, that is literally tax fraud right there. He also brags about using a partner weasel clause in which his cat is his partner. So this is actually a very strange thing in this book. But basically, there's a story in this book about how Robert gets out of contracts that do not look right to him. So basically, if he's about to sign a contract with a new, investment or anything like that, Robert basically claims that he just puts down something like subject to approval by my partner, except he claims that his partner is actually just his pet cat. That is really just terrible advice to be putting in a personal finance book, to lie to potential clients or whatever that your partner is just a cat so that you can get a better deal or back out of deals or whatnot. So that is just really bad advice right there. In the book, he also claims that his net worth is $50 to $100 million depending on the day. But in reality, his co-author just said he only made $9 million. So he's only really worth about $9 million, essentially. So he's not the best liar, I'll just say that. So yeah, there's just so much fraudulent information in this book that I could just go on and on about. It's really just not a good personal finance book, guys. It's just full of lies. And but the final thing I wanted to go over with you about this book is that it's really all just one big lie. It's literally just a straight up lie. Because I'm reading this article here, I'll just share my screen to you guys there for those of you watching the video. But it basically just said there's really no rich dad, because the main character in this book is this fictional rich dad character, who's apparently his friend from school's father, who's the rich dad in the situation, the uneducated rich dad. But by the looks of things, this character was literally just created for the purpose of this book. It's not actually a real person at all. So just from reading this article here, it says, one of the most frequent complaints about the Rich Dad series is that nobody can find any evidence of the Rich Dad. So, Mr. Kiyosaki states in the book that Rich Dad owns some of the best real estate on Waikiki Beach and is one of the richest men on the island of Hawaii. However, researchers for various magazines have scoured the real estate records of Hawaii and can't find such a person. In fact, Mr. Kiyosaki has told several different stories about the current whereabouts of Rich Dad. At least once he claimed that Rich Dad has passed on. Another time he claimed that Rich Dad is now invalid. In yet another book, he claims that the family of Rich Dad has asked not to be identified. In yet another instance, he reportedly admitted that Rich Dad is not a single person, but a composite character based on several of his advisors, including his best friend's father, the original Rich Dad, Mr. Buckminster and Fuller, and many others, blah, blah, blah. So, basically, the Rich Dad character in this book is just a complete lie. It's just a fictional character, not real at all, and it was just made for the purpose of this book. So, essentially, everything that you're learning, or that you're reading from this book, is just complete and utter horse manure, like, not even exaggerating. Nothing that this guy wrote, this Robert wrote in this book, actually really happened at all, because it's really just more fictional than non-fiction, this book, because in the book he just goes on and on about all of the stuff that his Rich Dad has taught Robert. But yeah, it turns out that this Rich Dad character isn't even a real person at all. But I do just want to show you guys just a little bit of a clip from this Rich Dad radio show. So basically, the host of this show is, of course, Robert Kiyosaki. But in this special episode here, he basically invites on the son of the Rich Dad, in quotes there, air quotes, Rich Dad. So apparently, the son of the Rich Dad was a real person that Robert did go to school with, but it's only a very small portion of where he actually got his financial information from. So he didn't learn everything from this Rich Dad character. He basically just got the Rich Dad character, like I said, just to write this book, to give a foundation for this book, really. So let's just listen to what the real friend of Robert Kiyosaki from the book has to say. So here we go.
So when I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad, I had to get your agreement, right? That your name was not going to be used. I had to change your name.
Yes, yeah. And no one said anything until it became successful. Then I think 100 people claimed to be Rich Dad.
That's right. They came out of the woodwork, didn't they? Everybody was guessing.
Yeah. So I asked my dad, I said, hey, where are you at? And he says, nope. He said, when I'm gone, it's fine. But while I'm alive, no, I think there's an honor to being anonymous.
Yes,
right.
Yes. And you took over the family business, Al, right?
Yes.
So
I have.
So you're...
The other thing I wanted to share with the audience was that when Robert and I were going to school, in grade school, meaning 8th, 9th, 10th, all the way to senior, I was a skinny, sickly kid. Robert was a large Japanese American who played on the football team, and nobody messed around with Robert. So somehow Robert and I, because alphabetically in the public school system, we sat next to each other by K last names, we were always together. So when people picked on me, Robert, as a dear friend many, many years ago, would take them outside and beat the shit out of them.
You got to have a friend like that.
So yeah, basically who you're hearing in that little podcast episode there, his name is Alan, and he's basically the Mike character in the book. So that's Mike that was speaking there, the son of the air quotes Rich Dad. But yeah, so it turns out that the Rich Dad was technically a real person, but he was just really glorified. Like he just wasn't. He was the owner of a company in Waihi and all that, but he didn't really give that much information to Robert here. He basically, like I said, Robert basically just used the Rich Dad for this book here. So yeah, it's all really just a big lie, really. And I do also want to say that there was some useful information in this book. It wasn't all just horse manure. Like 20% of it was useful information. In the book, he goes on about how buying assets is very important for becoming rich, which I definitely agree with. You know, like you want to be buying investments and stocks and shares and bonds and real estate, and that's all good because it generates wealth without you having to actually work, which is always good. So I definitely agree with that to some degree. And in the book, he also goes on about how learning is more important than actually making money, because at the end of the day, you can't really make any money. You can't become rich if you haven't learned how to. So in the book, he goes on about how to learn how to make money, but he doesn't really talk too much about how, you know, the actual physical steps that you have to take to make money. He just basically explains that learning to make money is more important than actually trying to make money without, you know, learning anything, basically. So, but in saying that, at the same time, he literally mentions, quote unquote, often in the real world, it's not the smart people that get ahead, but the bold. So that is literally a quote-unquote reference from the book. So there were definitely a few contradictory things in this book. Like, one moment he's saying learning is more important than making money, but then he says often in the real world it's not the smart people that make money, but the bold. So one moment he's saying you should just be more bold and take more risks in order to make money, but then the next moment he's talking about how you should learn as much as possible, and then that's how you can make money. So there were so many contradictory points in this book as well. But yeah, overall, this book is just so full of like lies and bad advice, and really, honestly, the only real way you can make money is if either you somehow hit the jackpot and, you know, with some sort of shares, or win the lottery or something, I don't know, or if you have rich parents or something, or you come up with some sort of genius idea that creates value for consumers. If you like create some sort of product or service or anything that creates value, because that's essentially the one way that you can make money, because people just want value. That's the one thing people want. So when you make something and you sell it that has value, then you're going to be fine, guys. That's how you make money. But it's becoming increasingly harder these days to actually become rich and make these things that, you know, have value, really. So it's definitely harder these days to become rich than it was when this book was released, and that's another thing about this book. It is quite outdated. I mean, it was released in 1997, and quite a lot has happened since then. But yeah, honestly, I could just go on and on about this book, but yeah, I just want to keep this episode short because, yeah, I just don't want to be spending any more time on this. And like I said, there was a bit of useful information, so if you guys want to read, like, maybe the first, like, quarter, I think the first quarter of this book was probably the most useful, but after that it just got real repetitive and real scammy and just full of lies and all that. But if you guys want to read it for like the 20% of useful information, then go ahead. But me personally, I just think there's a lot of better financial books out there, way more useful. But yeah, so anyway, I think that can basically conclude this episode for today. Let me know what you guys thought, and without further ado, I'll see you in the next episode of Market Talk, and peace out.
Market Talk is a production of TeamTMS. For more episodes of Market Talk just like this one, visit us on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening.